August 18, 1953. Inside a CIA station in Tehran, a message arrives from Washington. It isn't the next phase of a plan. It's a retreat. The operation has been tried and failed, headquarters writes, and we should not participate in any operation against Mosaddegh which could be traced back to the US. The coup is over. Called off. In writing. By the CIA itself. Except one man reads that message and decides to ignore it. 24 hours later, Iran's government is gone. This is the story of a coup the CIA officially tried to cancel, and the single act of insubordination that changed the Middle East for the next 70 years. But to understand why two governments wanted a prime minister gone in the first place, we have to go back 2 years, to a fight over oil that no one in London or Washington expected to lose. By 1950, the refinery at Abadan on Iran's southern coast was the largest in the world. Iran was pumping roughly 1 out of every 10 barrels of oil burned on the planet. Almost none of the profit stayed home. In 1947 alone, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, British-owned, majority held by the British government itself, reported after-tax profits of £40 million. Iran's royalty that year? $7 million. Mohammad Mosaddegh, European-trained lawyer already in his 70s, turned that gap into a national cause. In March 1951, Iran's parliament voted to unanimize its own oil. Mossadegh became prime minister on the strength of that vote. Britain called it theft. It pulled every technician out of Abadan, shut the refinery down, and sent the Royal Navy to intercept any tanker that tried to buy Iranian oil. Mossadegh didn't back down. He flew to New York, argued Iran's case at the UN Security Council in person, and came home to a hero's welcome, Time magazine's Man of the Year 51. Washington, under President Truman, then the administration changed. And in Washington, the argument about Iran quietly shifted. This was no longer framed as a fight over oil contracts. It was no longer a motion cantorites. It was, American officials began to insist, by the summer of whether Iran would fall to the Soviet Union. The operation had a name, TP Ajax. Britain's half was called Operation Boot. On paper, it looked simple. Convince the Shah to sign a royal decree dismissing Mosaddegh and installing a rival general, Fazlollah Zahedi, in his place. Then make sure the streets and the army backed that decree once it existed. It was not cheap, and it was not improvised. The CIA's Tehran station held standing authorization to spend up to $1 million on the operation, plus a separate fund, refreshed every week, earmarked specifically to buy the loyalty of Iranian members of parliament. Both governments signed off at the highest level. Britain's Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary by July 1st, 1953. America's Secretary of State, CIA Director, and President by July 11th. The man sent to run it on the ground was Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, and, by every account, a true believer in the plan he'd helped design. On the night of August 15th, the pieces moved. An officer of the Imperial Guard carried the Shah's signed decree toward Mossadegh's residence. But Mosaddegh had been warned. The officer was arrested before he could deliver it. Word spread through Tehran within hours. The coup had failed. General Zahedi went into hiding. And the Shah, the one man the entire plan depended on holding his nerve, panicked. He fled the country that same night, first to Baghdad, then on to Rome, with no idea whether he'd ever come back. Overnight, station officers scrambled to keep the story alive without a Shah in the country and without a coup left to point to. Photostats of the original decree were printed on broadsheets and passed hand to hand through Tehran's bazaars. Whether any of it would actually work, one of the officers running it later admitted, was impossible to say. In Washington, the verdict came fast. On August 18th, CIA headquarters cabled Roosevelt directly. Stand down. The plan was dead, and pushing further risked exposing American fingerprints on a failed coup against a sitting head of government. By every rule of the operation, it was over. Roosevelt didn't send the reply headquarters expected. He stayed. August 19th began as an ordinary morning. By 9 o'clock, it wasn't. Crowds, pro-Shah, anti-Shah, paid, spontaneous. No one on the ground could fully tell one from the other, filled Tehran's streets. Tanks that were supposed to answer to the government instead rolled toward the radio station. Soldiers who'd been told to hold their posts joined the crowd instead. The fight for Radio Tehran lasted only minutes. 3 people died taking the building. By early afternoon, it was broadcasting General Zahedi's name, not Mossaddegh's. Witnesses described a strange, almost festive chaos. Crowds of men, women, and children flooding the streets, shouting, "Shah piruzast, the Shah is victorious." Cars drove past with their headlights blazing in broad daylight, a small, spontaneous signal of loyalty to a king who, at that exact hour, was still sitting in a hotel room in Rome, unsure if he had a country left to return to. By evening, tanks surrounded Mossaddegh's home. He fled before they arrived and surrendered to the new authorities the next day. In Rome, the Shah allowed himself one line of vindication. "It was my people who showed me that they were faithful to the monarchy." Inside the CIA's own Tehran station, the mood that night was almost disbelieving. The agency's internal history of the operation, written the following year and kept secret for 60 years, records the day plainly. Lives had been lost. But the report itself insists, not nearly as many as the rumors racing through the city in the heat of the moment claimed. Even the men who just toppled a government couldn't say, with real certainty, what it had cost. What is certain is this. The coup that succeeded on August 19th was not the coup Washington had approved in July, and it was not the coup that had already failed on the 15th. It was the coup one man built, alone, out of the wreckage of both. After his own government had told him to go home, Mosaddegh was tried that December, convicted, and sentenced to 3 years in solitary confinement. Prosecutors had asked for his execution. When the sentence ended, the punishment didn't. He spent the rest of his life confined to his home village, watched, until his death in 1967. The Shah ruled for 26 more years, backed at every turn by Washington and London, growing only more autocratic as time went on. In 1979, that rule collapsed entirely. A revolution he could not survive replaced him with an Islamic republic, and within the year, militant students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and held its staff hostage for 444 days, citing, explicitly, their fear of a second 1953. Both governments eventually admitted what they'd done. In 2000, the U.S. Secretary of State called the coup a setback for Iran's political development. In 2009, an American president stood in Cairo and referenced the overthrow of a democratically elected Iranian government as part of the two nations' tumultuous history. It was, by any measure, a short-term win bought at a staggering long-term price. It would be easy to tell this as a simple story. A foreign power reaches into another country and breaks it. The truth, sitting inside the CIA's own declassified files, is messier than that. Mossaddegh's coalition was already fracturing before Roosevelt ever ignored an order. His alliance with Iran's clergy had collapsed. His economy was buckling under the British boycott. His own use of emergency powers had already cost him support at home. Foreign intelligence services didn't invent a crisis in Iran. They found a real one and pushed. Iran's own leadership still invokes 1953 today in speeches about sanctions and foreign interference as proof that history could repeat itself. Which leaves the harder question this story doesn't answer for you. When a nation's own divisions and a foreign power's ambitions arrive at exactly the same moment, whose failure is that, really? The country that broke? Or the powers that noticed? The CIA didn't declassify its role in Operation Ajax until 2013, 60 years after the fact. Some of what actually happened in Tehran that week is still missing from the record, redacted, or gone for good. If stories like this, the ones history tried to keep quiet, are what you come here for, subscribe. A new one drops every Thursday. This has been the Century Desk.